Nature is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you, your gas company, and the gas industry, whose respect for nature and the environment is reflected in the underwriting of this series. America's gas industry provides 160 million people with clean gas energy all across the country. And by Siemens Engineering Solutions in electronic components and medical systems, telecommunications, energy, and automation, Siemens. And by Canon, quality and innovation for the way we work and live.
As everyone who cares about wildlife knows, the African elephant is in deep trouble. In the past 10 years, 1/2 of Africa's elephants have been slaughtered for their ivory, as many as 100,000 in a single year. This sad and complicated story is in the news often and will continue to be, because the war to save the African elephant has not been won. This time on Nature, we go behind the headlines for the very personal story of a man who has lived with and filmed African elephants for 30 years. His name is Simon Trevor. His film is often brutal, heartbreaking, and controversial, but ultimately it is honest and intimate and unforgettable.
The elephants are the heartbeat and soul of Tsavo, a huge area of 8,500 square miles of Africa. Tsavo in Kenya became home to me the moment I arrived as a young game warden 30 years ago. Today, I'm still working with the animals, but as a wildlife filmmaker for survival. My assistant Hassan has been with me for 18 years. He was born 43 years ago, just a few miles from here. In those days, most of his people were elephant hunters, but all that's changed now. In 1948, Hassan's people had to stop hunting, for Tsavo was proclaimed a national park. All the animals were to be protected. If an emblem had to be chosen for Tsavo, it would surely be the elephant. Thinking back to my earliest memories of Tsavo, it's always the poaching which comes to mind. Poaching of elephants and rhino for ivory and horns by professionals, bow and arrow hunters, Hassan's people. Nobody knows for how many centuries the Walengulu have hunted elephants. Throughout the centuries, as each wave of traders arrived on the African continent, more and more ivory had to be found to satisfy the increasing demand. The Walengulu used immensely powerful bows. Their arrows were tipped with poison. After striking the target, the main shaft detached itself, leaving the arrowhead embedded in the stricken animal. Once the poison entered the bloodstream, the elephant would die sooner or later. There's no known remedy, even today. The killing went on virtually unchecked until in 1949 David Sheldrick was appointed warden of Tsavo. David was to spend 28 years of his life waging war against poachers. He came to respect the Walungulu for their skill in the bush and recognized they were the pawns of the ivory traders, but he could never accept the agony and horror of the slaughter. To combat the poaching, David trained a ranger force from carefully selected men. They became known as the best anti-poaching force in Africa. David organized everything with military precision, but at heart I knew he hated war. He wanted the park to be a place where people would come and enjoy themselves and see animals in peace. In those early years, we would often see another 10 herds like this in a morning. But we'd see other things too. I'm a terrible flyer. I've died 1,000 times up here with my stomach heaving. David did 7,000 hours of this kind of flying. That's like spending 580 days in the air. An elephant carcass with vultures on it. When I was on the ground, I'd thank my lucky stars I wasn't in the plane. But then I'd be getting sick on the ground anyway, but for a different reason. The 2 arrows had gone right in. The tail hairs were already on their way to be made into a bracelet for a tourist. The poachers had hacked the tusks out 3 days before, but the rangers followed the poachers' tracks anyhow. As the poaching continued, Tsavo's famous elephant herds became more and more nervous and frightened. The rangers sometimes had to take evasive action, as the scent of a poacher, as much as 2 miles away, would send a herd stampeding down on top of them. After such an encounter, they'd run for 10 miles, unable to know who was friend and who was foe. This old bull was about 50 when he died. He would have been about 25 years old when David first arrived in the park. Through all those years, he'd managed to avoid a poacher's arrow until about 6 months before, an arrow had just penetrated the skin. It was enough. Now he was gone. The elephants would come to the river for a moment of rest, a cool drink in pleasant surroundings. Other poachers would wait for the elephants. That was risky for the poachers too. It was easier for us to find them here. The world demand for ivory never let up. The price climbed. Many more people became involved. David estimated some of the older, more expert hunters would have killed 1,500 elephants each. By 1958, after a countrywide campaign, poaching had been virtually stopped in Kenya. In Tsavo, David Sheldrick had caught practically every male member of the Walungulu at one time or another. They vowed never to hunt in the park again. That agreement with the Walungulu was to stand for 20 years, but it wasn't respected by all the other poachers. David and Daphne's house was like an oasis in a dry land, a safe house for some very special animals. David's wife, Daphne, had hand-reared many of them after their mothers had been killed. They'd return from the park from time to maintain the bond with their foster mother. More of Daphne's orphans came to my house. My son Peter first saw elephants from this angle. Peter would wait impatiently each day for Eleanor and the others to arrive. I'd made them a place to drink out of the wall, yet I knew them to be the most gentle, careful animals. Most young children wish for a toy elephant. Peter was lucky enough to grow up with a real live one, called Eleanor. During the 1960s, Tsavo experienced droughts and floods, but the poaching was kept to a minimum, and great herds of elephants were once more to be seen. Then, in 1970, the worst drought in living memory struck Tsavo. With nowhere to hide, this poor old rhino felt exposed and defenseless. For 4 years, the rains failed. The land became parched and almost devoid of vegetation. It was a time of agony, when all the years spent fighting the poachers seemed to have been wasted. It appeared to me the animals were now going to die of starvation. The rain did eventually return. In 1975, rain falling 60 miles away brought a flash flood down the Tsavo, a sand river in the north of the park. The water signaled a new beginning. The land would recover. The hard times would be forgotten. Tsavo would once again come through with flying colors. One moment we were dying of thirst. The next we were almost drowning. Typical of Tsavo. The Golana River, running through the middle of the park, became totally impassable for months. No poaching patrols could be carried out on the other side. David Sheldrick knew the poachers would be making the most of the situation. Films that I made during those years are now the best records to show what it was really like during that awful period in Tsavo's history. Peter is now 18. In just the time it takes a boy to become a man.
How many elephants died in the drought?
9,000 out of a population of 40,000 had died, but even such a horrendous figure was not catastrophic in those days. It was what happened afterwards which mattered. By 1976, the poaching had once again escalated to even greater levels than ever before, fueled this time by the explosion of world tourism. Unthinking tourists now wanted ivory souvenirs instead of gold or silver. Tourists became responsible for the corruption of simple people and for the agony and destruction of thousands of elephants. They and the ivory traders. The dying bull would have lingered for hours if we hadn't ended his agony. Not only elephants were to die because of souvenirs. A ranger I'd known for 10 years, Corporal Topoika, was shot dead by Somali bandits armed with automatic weapons. The ranger's old 1418 war rifles would not be effective against the modern-day poacher. Even the old bow and arrow hunters were not safe. The Somali invaders wanted all the ivory. The killing of rangers heralded a new and terrible time ahead for Tsavo. David recognized the implications of these armed bandits from Somalia, but he could not get political and financial backing to fight them. Instead, he was transferred from Tsavo as a potential troublemaker. He died 7 months later of a heart attack. Since 1976, Africa has lost 750,000 elephants. 15,000 of these came from Tsavo. I felt there was little hope for the future. Then in 1985, the horrifying facts began to emerge as headlines around the world. There was a general feeling of outrage. The Kenyan public began demanding to know why poaching seemed to be out of control and why law and order had broken down. Time and time again, because of this state of affairs, in 1989, Kenya's president, Daniel Arap Moi, made a courageous decision and declared armed poachers were to be shot on sight. They were no longer traditional bow and arrow hunters, but well-trained and heavily armed bandits, backed up by big business. Rangers died in skirmishes against the better armed bandits. Tsavo was on the verge of disintegration. President Moi appointed Dr. Richard Leakey as director of the Kenya Wildlife Service, a new organization formed as a self-financing corporation to run wildlife, including the national parks. Bill Woodley has served national parks for 40 years. He was asked to coordinate anti-poaching operations. Joe Kyoko, an experienced senior warden and excellent pilot, would fly one of the park's aeroplanes. Stephen Gachangi became the warden in charge of the park. Most of the park's equipment was run down and obsolete. The government wildlife department had always been very underfunded, but the new corporation was given the capacity to raise and control its own finances along the lines of a commercial company. First, though, everything depended on saving the remaining elephants. Nowadays, when someone wishes me good luck, I take note. The poachers with their modern automatics are quite capable of shooting down an aeroplane. Joe Kyoko takes this risk every day of his life. Airplanes are the key to success against the poachers. Somebody has to fly them. In 1988, an aerial count was carried out. There were 6,500 elephants left in Tsavo and the surrounding area, down from... This herd of 800 animals is the largest remaining in Tsavo. Joe checks it every day. Around today, she's 32 now and accompanies the Sheldrick Trust assistants on daily walks in the park. She's never had a baby of her own, but has stayed to look after each new orphan baby that has been brought in. Mary came from a private zoo which was closed down. Lisa came from Tsavo. Her mother was killed for ivory. Chuma's mother also died for her tusks. He's safe now, and he has a new mother. Even though this incredible elephant we call Eleanor has witnessed a terrible massacre of her own kind, she still has faith in humans. Back in 1974, Gulliver was found all alone by Eleanor. By the time I arrived, they obviously knew each other, and he had decided he belonged to her. Eleanor had no milk, so there was only one thing to do. Daphne could only hope that Gulliver was not already too dehydrated to survive. Daphne Sheldrake had reared many elephant orphans in Tsavo. When Gulliver arrived, she had Raru, who was 12, Eleanor, 17. A young man named Dube went with them. Then there was Sobo, 8, with Gulliver, 1. Buchanese, 8.5. 2 rhino, also orphans, tagged along on the walks into the park to learn about the area where they'd all eventually return to the wild. Eleanor in the lead was showing caution. Raru, definite interest. There was something ahead for sure. It was wild elephants, and Buchanese had already introduced himself to a female calf who'd accepted him without reservation. The wild elephant showed no fear of the others, but Eleanor was nervous. I felt this was because of Gulliver. The little wild calf was the right shape for a baby elephant, fat and round. Buchanese was enchanted with her. Gulliver seemed thin and sad in comparison. Buchanese came to him. We can never know what passed between them, but it was obvious to me Gulliver was searching for his lost mother amongst the wild elephants. I felt the others knew he was unhappy. Eleanor just waited for Gulliver to return to her. She did her best to take the place of his real mother, but poor Eleanor couldn't really, for she had no milk. In the wild, elephants only occasionally adopt orphan calves. Gulliver had little chance of survival alone. Like all baby elephants, Gulliver needed to rest from time to time. Whenever he lay down, Eleanor forced him to stand again. I felt this was unfair of her. Afterwards, I realized she'd known all along he was very sick and needed to be kept on his feet if he was to survive. Once an elephant goes down, it generally dies, as Eleanor knew so well. Two years before she'd found Gulliver, Eleanor had come across this cow which had collapsed with a poisoned arrow in her. Astonishingly, Eleanor showed the same interest in the tusks that wild elephants do, although I doubt she'd ever seen a dead elephant with tusks before. Perhaps a truly wild elephant was beyond help, but Eleanor seemed to express her grief by trying to lift the carcass as she would a sick or dying friend. Elephants show no interest in the dead of other animals, except on occasions, after killing a human, they'll bury the body under a pile of branches. Sometimes they'll bury the corpse of an elephant. Other emotions emerge. In desperation, she kicks the carcass with her back leg, a gesture normally used to wake a sleeping calf. What turmoil went on inside her head, I cannot imagine, but I've never forgotten the expression on her face. Elephants often stop and inspect an elephant carcass, but they'll pay special attention to the bones of a dead relative. I find it the strangest, most haunting behavior I know about them. Elephants often carry away bones from carcasses, but it's always the ivory they show most interest in. I don't know why. It's as if they know it's cursed. Eleanor never had a mother to teach her about ivory, but to me her actions spoke louder than words. In the late 70s, the Kenya government gave Daphne Sheldrick permission to build a house in the Nairobi National Park. After David died, she founded the Sheldrick Trust in memory of him. She raises funds for urgently needed equipment and repairs in the parks, and numerous other projects, including the care of orphaned animals. In this way, Daphne continues the struggle to protect wildlife, which she and David began 40 years ago in Tsavo. The Sheldrick Trust has money to rescue baby elephants, thanks to many people. The rescue of an orphaned baby or two is not going to save the species as a whole, but to me it symbolizes more than anything else the need to care as being the basis of all conservation. There are two of them, rescued in the nick of time, their mothers massacred in the name of trade. Now an aeroplane, the quickest and least exhausting method of transportation, carries elephants and men to Nairobi. But in the hustle and bustle of getting the elephants aboard, everyone had forgotten that Peter and John had never flown before. After half an hour or so, Peter, I think, realized we were going to stay up and quite enjoyed him a new baby elephant. The little bull was in a bad way. It didn't look as if he was going to make it. Daphne Sheldrick has more experience in raising young elephants than anyone I know. First, these terrified calves must be reassured that these humans are not going to act in the same way as those who massacred their mothers, and they must be persuaded to take liquid. Today, Daphne now knows the right milk formula for baby elephants under 6 months. But it took her a long time to find it. She cannot help thinking back to those far-off days in Tsavo when she had a little elephant called Aisha. She was only a day or two old when she was brought in. Daphne knew she had little chance of living, for in those days she had not found the formula for duplicating elephant's milk. But she never stopped trying. She very nearly succeeded with Aisha, but in the end, the little calf died. Today, even the youngest calf has a good chance, thanks to Daphne and her daughter Jill's perseverance and a dedicated backup team. Suddenly, everything seems too much for the little elephant. She's collapsed. She's a fighter. She wants the bottle again. Malaika, as she was named, probably weighs 300 pounds. She'll have to be fed every 3 hours, day and night, for months. And someone whom she knows will have to be with her all the time, day and night. The little bull, Ndume, meaning masculine, has been on an intravenous drip. There's no more we can do for him now, except to hope he doesn't get pneumonia. I wonder what terrible nightmares are going through his head. No matter for how many hours Joe Kyoko has to fly up and down the length of Tsavo, he must always remain fully alert for the slightest indication that something is not right below. These elephants are all on the move. They have been seriously disturbed. To Joe, the evidence is clear, but to find out why is not so easy in the vastness of Tsavo. "80 miles away, 3 of them killed several days ago. Today, when Joe sends in a report, he knows something will be done, for we now have the beginning of an anti-poaching team. The transport had become so broken down that Richard Leakey had to ask the Land Rover dealers in Kenya for 18 vehicles on credit. On orders from the President, for the first time the Rangers were equipped with automatic weapons, similar to those of the bandits. That's what modern-day poachers are: bandits, robbers, and murderers. I wanted to show everyone what it was like to face them. 2 gunmen can shoot a whole herd in seconds, hack out the tusks, move off a short distance, bury the tusks, and by nightfall they can be 45 miles away. Catching up with them is extremely difficult. I hadn't been on patrol since David Sheldrick died 13 years ago, but immediately I was struck by the sheer menace of the guns. The attitude of the Rangers showed very clearly how much they recognized the firepower of the bandits, most of whom were army deserters from other countries, trained in guerrilla warfare. As always, one man tracks. The others look ahead. No talking, only hand signals. We'd found the tracks of the poachers 4 hours ago. There were 5 of them. The Rangers didn't like me sticking my head up. They were concerned for my safety. I had a telephoto lens. I'd hoped that would allow me to stay back. But even though the bush appears open, things just disappear. Either they were there waiting for us, or they were moving ahead. We couldn't tell. I couldn't help thinking that this was the bottom line. Young Kenyans risking their lives for elephants, just because people thousands of miles away wanted ivory. Joe Kyoko, in the plane, was waiting just out of earshot. We decided to call him in. From the air, he'd have a better chance to see the poachers. As I waited, I wondered how many people knew of the efforts Kenyans were making to save their elephants. Joe arrived suddenly, knowing he had to surprise the poachers if they were still there. Once the plane was overhead, we could move up. Joe is well ahead. We stay on the bandits' tracks. They've been moving all the time. Joe is closer now, but still gives no sign he's seen them. We can tell that he must think they're here somewhere, hiding. They might shoot at the plane, but that'll give them away to us. That's the signal. He's seen them. They're shooting at Joe now. He can't hear the shots from inside the plane. The rangers didn't want me to film their faces. I didn't want to anyhow, for I was suddenly struck by the reality of the awful measures we'd been forced to take to protect our elephants. This poacher died inside the hideout where they'd been camping. He'd emptied his gun at the rangers. We were being covered all the time by other rangers. 3 poachers had died. We knew there were at least 2 more in the gang. The bandits have such a formidable reputation that the rangers never relax until all the guns are in safe hands, even if the previous owner does appear dead. These young men have only heard of the dreaded Russian AK-47. Now's their chance to see one. Joe has something for us. How Joe saw the gun from the air, I don't know. A G3 automatic rifle. There was blood on the ground. We never found him. The rangers finally caught this unarmed man 2 days later. He had no gun with him, and they began to interrogate him, suspecting he was not quite as innocent as he pretended to be. Many years ago, this ranger, Doob, had another job, a much more pleasant one. As a young man, he looked after Eleanor and the other orphans. He was with Eleanor when she found Gulliver. he learned much about the ways of animals during the time he spent with Daphne's orphans. Perhaps today Dube understands more about the animals he risks his life to save than any other ranger. Time and time again, the captured poacher denied he knew anything, but the rangers by this time felt sure he was from the gang. They bided their time. He suddenly gave in, first making sure, though, he was going to be safe. The rangers were delighted. Things were looking up. Dube was given the honor of uncovering the booty. Poachers trust no one with their guns. Whoever owns a gun is all-powerful and can become rich overnight. It's another G3 rifle. No magazine, no ammunition. They'd be buried elsewhere. He'll tell us where they are in time. The Rangers had now recovered 3 G3s and 2 AK-47s, 120 rounds of ammunition and 15 spare magazines. Quite a haul for one operation. If bandits can be persuaded to become informers, they must be protected from retaliation by their own side. The best way of hiding them is to give them a uniform and put them in amongst the Rangers. Later they might even join up. One particular young man took us to this area and assured us this was the spot some of his cronies had buried some tusks. No, he hadn't been here himself, and it was a year ago, but from their description, he knew this was the place. He was right, of course. A ranger probing around with a pointed stick had felt a slight softness in the ground. A young cow's tusk. She wouldn't have been more than 12 years old. This one looks like it has the weight and shape of a young bull. More young cow tusks. It looked like a whole herd has been laid to rest under this one small bush. It has been established that 60% of all elephants killed today are cows. The majority would have had calves, which would have died without trace. On this one operation, lasting 8 days, one informer led us to 182 tusks, or 91 elephants, gunned down in cold blood. The tusks from 1,500 elephants, recovered from all over Kenya in 4 years, would represent a considerable amount of revenue to the Kenyan government if they were to be sold to the trade. But today this ivory has another destiny. The average tusk weight is only 3.3 kilos. 20 years ago it was 15 kilos. Many now come from tiny calves, never found, never counted. These are the invisible victims of the ivory trade, unless, by some miracle of chance, they are spared, to be loved and cared for by people the world over. Ndume and Malika have survived, although they are still racked with memories of their ordeal, walking endlessly, unable to sleep until they virtually collapse each evening. Daphne, though, is confident they'll make it, and one day be big and strong enough to join Eleanor in Tsavo, if she's still around. Do we have to discard our simple childhood love of elephants just because we grow into the adult's world governed by technology and money? A tusk from Tsavo lies amongst a great mountain of ivory worth $3 million, proof of man's greed. But today it'll be seen as a clear statement by President Moy and the people in ivory. Kenyans believe they cannot ask other people to stop buying ivory if they are selling it themselves. Perhaps no one has fought harder than Daphne Sheldrick for the elephants of Africa. The example she has set is an inspiration to Kenyans to meet the challenge of the future with courage. There'll always be memories of Tsavo. The film I took in 1975 of these huge tusks from the old bulls of Tsavo is a chilling reminder of what has happened in the past. They and the elephants are gone forever. David Sheldrick, even in those days, had predicted what was about to happen, but no one had wanted to listen to him. Since October 1989, trading in ivory has been banned in most countries, but already Hong Kong has been allowed to reopen its stockpiles for a limited time. Elephants will continue to be betrayed so long as the demand is there, unless everyone sees ivory as being socially repulsive and therefore worthless. The killing will go on. Kenyans are now fighting and dying for their elephants. They know elephants are crucial to the tourist industry, the backbone of the entire Kenyan economy. They value them alive and healthy, to enjoy and to keep for future generations. Nobody needs an ivory elephant. Living elephants are worth so much more. David Sheldrick's plane still flies on anti-poaching operations. It's 25 years old now, and much of the country below is empty. David still seems to cast his shadow over Tsavo, guiding those who are now responsible for its future. There are still elephants. There is still space. There is still time. The choice is ours.
Nature is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you, and by Siemens Engineering Solutions in electronic components and medical systems, telecommunications, energy and automation, Siemens, and by Canon, quality and innovation for the way we work and live, and by the gas industry, helping provide cleaner air with clean gas energy.
This is PBS.